Hello! Welcome to the Overview of Enough is Enough webinar as part of the New York State Training and Technical Assistance Center's onboarding series for EIE providers. This webinar will discuss New York State Education Law 129B, also known as Enough is Enough. I also want to note that this webinar has been revised and adapted from the original one created in July 2020 by the Enough is Enough TTA Center and was presented by Nasia Gordileva, a previous TTA coordinator. My name is Tracia Bomedos Roveras, and I'm super excited to be discussing Enough is Enough with you. I've worked in New York State campus violence prevention and response since about 2018, and I've worked in both the central New York and New York City regions. So, for today's webinar, we'll have about three main sections. First, I'll spend some time giving a background of Enough is Enough and some key resources to make sense of it. Then, for the second part, we'll touch on the program structure from a high level, and then that's where I'll highlight your role as Enough is Enough provider and what that means and what those activities consist of. And then finally, I'll end on sharing a few best practices when collaborating with other EIE providers, which is highly encouraged. And with that, let's get started. So, what is EIE? New York State Education Law Article 129B, also referred to as EIE, was passed in 2015. It's notable because it created a funding stream for rape crisis and sexual assault programs to collaborate with colleges and universities for campus violence prevention and response. EIE's goal is to prevent and address sexual assault, dating violence, domestic violence, and stalking in higher ed campuses. And this applies to all colleges and universities in New York State, regardless if they're public or private. So it's very exciting that it's comprehensive and applies to everyone. I also, though, really want to underscore at the beginning that while schools do need to prioritize their compliance, your role as an EIE provider is as a resource and not as a compliance officer. So it's deeply important that, again, you can assist with their compliance, but their compliance is not under your purview specifically. So now that we understand EIE again as a law, New York State Education Law 129B, let's discuss about five different resources that you can use to understand your work and activities as an EIE provider. So the resources that I'm highlighting for the next two slides are some things that I believe can really benefit both new EIE providers to become acquainted with the law and their scope of work, but are also really great refreshers for seasoned providers too. I'm also displaying the images of the first page of each of these resources just for you to have as a helpful reference. First, you can review the law itself. It's about 24 pages and is publicly available. Then, building on top of that, the Department of Education has released a 50-page Enough is Enough guidance document that defines some of the key terms throughout the law in much greater detail. So, this is a great, very helpful resource to have in your prevention toolbox. Then, lastly, on this side, I'm also uplifting a 2016 collaborative report. This is from the New York State Campus Working Group, and it's entitled Campus Sexual Violence Following the Passage of Enough is Enough Recommendations from the Field. It was developed in collaboration with direct service providers and advocates to assist campuses. So, it's written in that style. So this tool can be really helpful to kind of see the conversation and look at violence at the community level and see what resources and what advice is given to campuses directly to kind of build their capacity to engage in sustainable violence prevention work. We'll spend a little bit more time discussing who OPDV is, but before we do that, I just want to also note that OPDV, the funder of this program, publishes an annual report that provides a summary of all of the data received from the EIE grantees that can be accessed on their website that I've displayed here. This is just, again, a very helpful macro level view to understand where, like a a temperature check of the work currently. And then finally, of course, if you're watching this video, the TTA Center website, which is full of great information. Here, I've highlighted the Collegiate Sexual Assault Resource Guide and some of the toolkits as really helpful resources and places to revisit when you're in need of a fresh start or in need of some support for your programming and entry points. Now that we've gathered a macro level understanding of EIE law, now let's outline some of the key elements of EIE. So, first, EIE established a statewide uniform definition of affirmative consent. This means that New York state law has mandated that every college and university must have in their policy the definition of affirmative consent, defining consent as knowing, voluntary, and a mutual decision among all participants to engage in a sexual activity. They also clarify that the definition of consent does not vary based on participant sex, sexual orientation, gender identity, or sexual expression. And it clarifies that consent can be given by words or actions as long as those words or actions create a clear permission regarding participants' willingness to engage in an activity. And then it also underlines that silence or lack of resistance in and of itself does not demonstrate consent. So, this is where that affirmative part comes in. So, this should be reflected in the school's policy, and it is the school's responsibility to ensure that this is also in the student code of conduct. So, that's their part. But you, as an EIE provider, now can come in as a person who can help students develop those knowledge, attitude, skills, and language to practice affirmative consent. One best practice when teaching consent as a provider is also to try not to bombard students with what not to do and really lean into using a strengths based approach to lift up what they may already be doing really well and then to help them learn additional healthy relationship behaviors on top of that. Additionally, when teaching consent, it's also important to help people identify ways that they can respond if they get a no or if they get hesitation. Help them develop some of those tools that they can employ so that they don't take it personally and react in a negative way if consent is removed. So there's a lot of room to have to breathe to life a very comprehensive understanding of consent and develop skills to practice consent. Next is the drug and alcohol amnesty policy, and this is major. So, this policy ensures that if a student is under the influence of drugs or alcohol when they experience any of the four types of harm that Enough is Enough law is designed to protect, so sexual assault, dating violence, domestic violence, and stalking, they will not be subjected to a campus code of conduct investigation. And similarly, if a bystander shares in something when they witnessed that they were under the influence of drugs or alcohol, they will also not go through a disciplinary process if they're sharing information in good faith. So, this encourages personal safety and positive bystander behavior over legal concerns with underage drinking and substance abuse. This is so important because we know that oftentimes individuals do not seek help if they're nervous about getting in trouble for drugs and alcohol, especially if they're underage. So, this is super critical to highlight in trainings, especially in a Know Your Rights training, that this provision is a mandate under state law. Next are campus climate surveys. So, under Enough is Enough, schools also must conduct anonymous campus climate surveys at least every other year and aggregate reporting data and make it publicly available. So, these surveys are sent to the entire student body. And for example, some of the questions that they may ask are going to be around gaining student knowledge of reporting, college adjudicatory processes, as well as the experiences students had when they reported, if they did report, where and how incidents were reported. And if incidents weren't reported, why they weren't reported. There also should be questions on there about the availability of campus resources, or resources on and off campus, actually, and whether or not students as a community know the definition of consent, if they're aware of the differences between their school policies and the penal law, and it also measures bystander attitudes and behaviors. So these surveys are full of information, again, for you as an EIE provider to use it as a data point in your programming. And they provide at least data every other year about the temperature check of the most recent student body. So next is a student bill of rights. Within EIE, a student bill of rights must be publicized. This includes the right to make a report to law enforcement, but also the right to choose whether or not a student wants to disclose or participate in any judicial processes at all. It also includes the right to receive health care and counseling services where available. And the right to be protected from retaliation is also under EIE law, which clarifies the students have the right to be asked to recount the incident as few times as possible. Students also, if they do choose to report to the school, have the right to access at least one appeal, and they can be accompanied through the process by an advisor of choice throughout. I do want to flag briefly that as an Enough is Enough provider, you may elect to serve as an advisor of choice for a student, but this is not required of you or expected of you by OPDV. So connect with your TTA coordinator to get more information about specific training for serving as an advisor of choice. Students also have the right to have disclosures of domestic violence, dating violence, stalking, and sexual assault to be treated seriously by the school and to be free from any suggestion that the reporting individual or the student survivor is at fault. And they also have the right to not contact law enforcement as well as the right to protections and accommodations. Finally, under EIE law, campuses are required to provide some comprehensive training for students, staff, and faculty, administrators, and a couple of key resources. So, schools are encouraged that if they do not have the in house capacity or resources to provide all of the rights that students are mandated under Enough is Enough, to enter into a partnership through a memorandum of understanding or an MOU with with a local rape crisis and sexual assault program and with a local hospital that's designated to perform sexual assault forensic exams. Before I go on, I want to briefly describe what an MOU is. And so, an MOU is a formal document that outlines an agreement between two or more parties, and it really just clarifies their expectations and defines how they'll work together. But it isn't typically legally binding like a contract, so it kind of can be thought of more so as like a formal handshake. And there is a sample MOU and guidance from OPTV on navigating MOUs on the TTA Center website, so please be sure to check out that resource. So schools must make sure that regardless of where they are, regardless of what on-site resources they have, all students have access to these rights under Article 129B as a student. Here is where you can come in and support as an Enough is Enough provider. So, whether that's counseling or supporting the climate surveys or a campus needs assessment, offering expert systems advocacy, or supporting a student with deciding whether or not to report to the school or limit criminal legal system, there are so many opportunities for you to support student survivors and support students as a whole, knowing what their rights and resources are. And then finally, we'll discuss training. We'll also go more depth in another webinar about training, but this is one of the biggest areas of contribution for Enough is Enough providers. So schools are required to offer, and for some students are required to complete primary prevention education training around sexual assault and bystander attitudes and some skills. So again, we'll dive much deeper into this in a separate video, so be sure to check that out as well. But a brief example of what this may look like is supporting, incoming student orientation workshops, training some campus staff, student leaders, or even creating workshops for student groups, peer advisors, and so much more. So, just as a final note here, again, as a reminder, you're here to support schools with fulfilling their requirements, but you are not here to verify whether or not they're fulfilling those requirements. That's just simply not your role. And it can be really hard to develop a trusting partnership if the overarching message is rooted in compliance and not rooted in campus safety. So now that we've discussed the EIE provider role more, a little bit of its history, and then what pathways it expands for students, let's look at it from a community standpoint. So first here at the core, in this first bubble, we have the students, and don't forget their families, as well as faculty and staff at an institution. This is the school community, which is served by colleges and universities themselves. As an EIE provider, your scope of work encompasses building relationships with the campuses and institutions to serve their community. So, this encompasses spending time on campus, attending events, getting to know the best way to respond to the diverse array of needs that a body presents, and being deeply intentional about those strategies that you use. Then, supporting you is the TTA Center, which offers resources such as this onboarding series. The TTA Center is led by the New York State Coalition Against Sexual Assault, also referred to as NISCASA, which provides direct technical assistance to the upstate region, so the southern tier, central and western, and northeast New York. NISCASA then subtracts the New York City Alliance Against Sexual Assault for the downstate regions, so lower Hudson, Long Island, and New York City. As the regions have unique needs, your respective TTA provider is the best resource in guiding you to your answers and responding to questions as they arise. And regardless of your expertise, the TTA Center really seeks to ensure that you have the most up to date and effective strategies, research, and opportunities for knowledge generation to be a successful EIE provider. And helps you develop that programming that's inclusive and accessible. And it can help you leverage that expertise that you have with other EIE providers and look in need of mentorship and support. Then we see here by this final circle that the New York State Office for the Prevention of Domestic Violence, also known as OPDV, oversees the Enough is Enough grant program as well as the TTA Center. OPDV provides contract guidance and monitors grantee activities. So, any questions you have about reporting requirements, budget, and the EIE work plan can and should be directed directly to OPDV. And I've displayed their email at the bottom of this screen. It's enough is enough at opdv.newyork.gov or opdv.ny.gov to be very, very specific. So, altogether, we can see how each group is a feedback loop that feeds into each other, still with students, families, staff, and faculty at the core. We are working with campuses to keep them safe and facilitate mutual empowerment and respect amongst its community members. With all of these key stakeholders in the circle chart, we're all unified by the goal of connecting as many students and campuses to EIE services and programming. So, finally, I'd like to close on collaborating with other EIE providers and uplift some guidance from OPDV. So, being rooted again in our shared goal of connecting as many students and as many campuses as possible to EAE providers, we can also add the goal of making sure that those resources are as comprehensive as possible for all the campuses in our catchment areas. OPDV has developed a collaboration document that I'm displaying the first page of here. This is very helpful in knowing what to do when there are multiple EIE providers in a given county, and when it is appropriate for an EIE provider to work outside of that area, outside of their catchment area. And it also provides some guidance for the New York City program. So, again, please, please, please to be sure to review this resource. So after you've reviewed that resource, here go a couple of technical, practical ways to collaborate with programs, also without accidentally counting populations twice or counting participants twice. I mean. So, first, you can split the mandated populations that are outlined in the primary prevention and trainings webinar. So, say for example, one program may be better suited to train all of the athletes and the faculty, and another program can train the student leaders, first year students, international students, or something. This can be a really clear and effective way of breaking them apart for each other. So that this should also be reflected when you all are filling out your MOU in collaboration, and make sure that's also explicitly laid out for the campus partner as well for clarity. Then filling out that MOU together is also a really great time to establish some clear points of contact. If there is a program though where you are co-training together, just be sure to remember to split the numbers then to avoid duplication. I can't understate enough, though, to just really keep in mind your organizational capacity and your expertise. We are all operating here as a team, so let's play to our strengths. It's also really beneficial to communicate expectations very clearly mutually in advance, also for due diligence and quality of programming. If you're looking for another way, though, to still split populations, you can look at having different points of contact from within the school community. So, for example, maybe one program has a really strong history with the Title IX coordinator, but the other program has a great history with the counseling center. These different entry points will allow you both to reach different communities and still really serve that campus well while integrating trainings throughout for different populations. So, again, being in regular contact with each other as different programs can be super beneficial in keeping track of which communities are being reached in this way, and which ones aren't. Again, our goal is to make sure that we're reaching everyone, not just the folks you would expect to volunteer or show up at trainings, but the folks who may think that it's not important or who may think that a consent 101 training is just not something that they need. So, again, you want to try to engage with as many different communities on a campus as possible. And when you do work on a campus that's also being served by another Enough is Enough provider, that you're communicating with each other regularly and sharing those strategies that you have that have been successful. So if you have found one particular outreach strategy to be working really, really well, let that program know so that they can try it out. And maybe if you get trained to ask, or you get asked to train a new population that you've never been asked before, reaching out to that program and asking if they have, do they have any tips or best practices? Or if you have trained that community before, do you want to take that again so that there's some continuity with the ongoing training? So there are quite a few different ways and examples to communicate with other providers that, again, just are sharing resources, sharing strategies, but can also make this sometimes isolating work a little bit easier on each other. Another strategy may be, instead of splitting population, to split what you offer. So one program may offer direct services, for example, but another program is providing all of the prevention trainings. And then after a workshop, then the program that is providing resources comes in for 5 minutes and provides like an update, leaflets, resources, and etc. Just remember again that if you're co-delivering a prevention education workshop of some sort, to remember to split the reported numbers to avoid duplication. You may also decide to break it up by times of year, specialty programming, being an onboarding or ongoing. So, for example, maybe one program wants to take the August, September, New Year orientations, as well as the transfer programs in January, maybe, and then the other program wants to take like domestic violence awareness month in October, maybe like a Valentine's Day program and sexual assault awareness month. So you all have a lot of creativity in how you want to go about working that area. So, as I close out the conversation on collaborating, I want to really uplift one exciting resource, such as the community forum on the TTA Center website. So, I've also put another picture here for your reference. And with this forum, you can connect with other providers, discuss challenges, approach solutions as a community, and share best practices. So, you can definitely be in contact with your TTA provider to be set up on the forum. And just remember that talking to each other about our strategies and our experiences is our lifeline in this work. So this is just something that is a really great resource and tool to use. And so with that, we'll close our webinar overview of Enough is Enough. And thank you so much for your time.